This is an interview with Halima Taylor, a longtime Subud member, helper, and I think you're a nurse, is that correct too? Yeah.
And a midwife.
And a midwife, wow, a lot of stuff.
And a potter.
Okay.
Well,
So-
now I'm a potter. I'm not a midwife anymore. Yeah.
Okay, so Halima, can you start by just telling us how you came into Subud?
Well, both of my parents were opened. My father, of course, he was opened in 1958 when Bapak came through the US for a couple of weeks on his way back to Cilandak or to Indonesia. And my mother was opened, but she didn't like it. She didn't stay, and she divorced my father, and I didn't see him again until I was 18. So just a few weeks before my 18th birthday, but I'd heard about Subud. I'd only heard bad things. I heard that it was some kind of weird thing that my father had decided to do that, that certainly my stepfather, my mother's new husband, didn't care for. So I wasn't particularly eager to meet my father because we hadn't been in touch. But I had been living on the Navajo reservation, going to school there, and I was studying Navajo history and culture and silversmithing and things like that. And so my grandmother, his mother, invited me. She and I were always very close, and she invited me for Thanksgiving. Because I was in New Mexico, or Arizona, it was very easy to get there. So I took the train and I got there, and my grandmother said, "Oh, I invited your father." And I was sort of being the soul of tact in those days. I said, "Ooh, what'd you invite him for?" But he was nice, and I liked him, and he wasn't quite the way he had been portrayed to me, in spite of the fact that he hadn't kept contact with me. So then there was a crisis, and I had to change a few things. I ran out of money and I couldn't stay in school. And he came and got me, and he sent me to Skymont. And there I met a gal named Haji Layla Reynolds. And Layla said, "Oh, Halima, you should get open, because then we can hitchhike around Europe and stay with Subud people for free." So I thought, well, maybe I'd give it a try, and I threw the I Ching, and the I Ching said something very wise about it, and it didn't seem to be terrible. So then they tested and received no, and this happened 3 times. So I actually spent 3 months before I got opened. I finally did get opened, but in that 3 months, I spent time with my father, and I spent time with my first stepmother, bonus mother, Rafaela. And Rafaela had told me about Ibu Sumari, and how it was really important in her estimation for me to meet Ibu Sumari, because Ibu really helped people. She was really, she was an extraordinary helper and person. And then, of course, I was opened in 1971, and just a little bit after they had tested the first time, Ibu died. And I was really devastated. I was quite sad, because I felt like she was probably the only one that could help me. So I did finally get opened, and I didn't feel much in the Latihan. I had a really hard time surrendering. it took me a few years to unclench my fists. You know, I was trying so hard to surrender.
Yeah.
And, but then just a few months after I had been open, I used to babysit for a lot of the children at Skymont. And I had this dream. So I had a dream, and I dreamt that I was babysitting the Arquette children in they lived in this little house. I forget what we called it, but it had a little doorway with a tiny little roof over it. And in the dream, I was babysitting the Arquette kids, and I'd gotten them to bed. And then I heard this noise outside, and I went and looked, and a gold carriage pulled up. And I looked, and it was Ibu, and she'd come to see me. And I was just overjoyed that she'd come to see me, you know, even though she was dead. And I went to run out and meet her, and it started raining. And I shrunk back. And as it rained, I stepped out of this carriage, and she was wearing this long flowing blue silk thing. And she just started dancing like this, and the raindrops were hitting her fingers. And every time a raindrop hit her fingers, it made music. And it was like crystals that were making this beautiful music. And she was smiling at me, and she was just going like this. And then the dream ended. And I was still there crouched underneath this little roof. And I didn't know what that meant for years. And I didn't tell anybody about it because I didn't think it was significant. There was nothing had happened. I'd just been stuck under the roof, under the little overhang. And then I was talking with my bonus mother about it some years afterwards, quite a few years afterwards. And she just looked at me and she said, well, rain is purification, you know. And I thought, oh my gosh, it is, isn't it? And many things happened over the years. I had all these experiences in Latihan where I would be doing my Latihan, and I would be aware of Ibu next to me, teaching me this dance, the dance that she had done as she stepped out of this carriage. And it happened then that there were some people who weren't moving in Latihan, and I would find myself being shown how to do this dance in front of them. And I wouldn't know until, you know, suddenly I would notice that, oh, this person is there and she's not moving. And Ibu's with me and we're doing this. She's showing me how to do this dance. It happened on several occasions. And when and I realized later that rain isn't just purification, it's also grace, which maybe is the same thing, but. So it was this very important experience that happened because I had this great wish to meet Ibu. And even though she was no longer with us, I got to meet her, and she really helped me in my life. She helped me a lot. And she came to my Latihan for many years. Not lately. So I don't know if maybe I've reached a point where she doesn't need to make the journey anymore. I don't know what it costs her, you know, but I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful that she was so generous with her energy towards me.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So can you tell me what year was it that you were open? You mentioned you were in.
It was in 1971, so it was just after the World Congress in Chalandak. I didn't get to go because I wasn't opened yet. And I'm sure there was no money anyway, so I wouldn't have been able to afford it. But as I had dropped out of high school. I left home at 17. So I'd been away from home for about a year when I met my father. And I had been, you know, going to school and trying to support myself. And I was working, I think, as a waitress at the time in Front Royal.
So have you had any kind of experiences with BAPOC?
Not so much with BAPOC. I did have one in Toronto at the Congress. We were all going at the end of Ramadan and greeting him, you know. And I did that. And when I looked up at him, I looked into his eyes, and it was very strange. It was kind of like it was like a camera lens, you know, the old camera lenses that used to go like that.
Mhm.
And I feel like I heard something go tunk. And I always thought, oh, because I had this feeling that I wasn't good enough, and the first time I ever saw BAPOC and did testing, because I didn't move in Latihan and people were concerned about it, and you know, and so the first time I did testing, there was had a sweetheart that was Haris, and my father was there, and my brother Maxwell was there. They were all up in the gallery watching, you know, and everybody else was receiving stuff in the testing, and they were, you know, doing things, and I was standing there, and I was getting more and more. Well, I think I might have been crying. I don't know, but I was, you know, feeling it inside as if I was devastated. And then I heard BAPOC say something, and it was sort of like somebody took their hand and pushed it into my chest and grabbed hold of my heart and went. It was really painful, and I burst into tears because it was very, very painful. You know, it just physically painful. And then I heard Sharif saying, sort of through this haze of misery, I heard Sharif saying, BAPOC says you're letting your hearts interfere with your receiving. And then as I was crying, he said the next question, and the next question was, where are your eyes? Of course, my eyes were closed, but suddenly I saw my eyes. And then he said, and now see from your inner. And it was like a zoom lens going backward. So I was seeing my eyes, but then I was seeing them from this other place that was way far away, and it just went whoop, like that. And I did have, of course, a lot of experiences in testing with BAPOC at the Germany Congress. I remember how he asked, I was sitting with a friend of mine up at the very back on the bleachers. There were bleachers, and then we were right at the back. And so we had a view of the whole assembly. And he'd asked this question, and it was sort of like an invisible cloud came over the room, and people were falling on the floor and groaning. And by the time it was just coming to us and we could feel it, you know, this cloud was palpable. I mean, it was horrible. And then BAPOC said, finish, yeah, you know. So that was one thing. Another thing that happened at that same Congress, we liked to sit there and watch the men's testing because they would do funny things. You know, we watched the women's testing too, but the men's was somehow funnier to us. And we looked, and we were both living in England at that time. My other friend Halima, who lives in Virginia now, but so BAPOC was testing with the men, and we were sort of laughing at the various things that various people were doing, especially the ones we knew, you know. And then suddenly it felt kind of icky. It just felt disturbing, and we both looked at each other, and we looked up and we noticed that BAPOC had left the room. He probably went to the restroom or something, but he'd left the room. And we both left too. And then when we did go back in, BAPOC had come back and everything was fine. And it was, again, the feeling of levity and that feeling of not being really in contact with what other people were doing or their other. So it was sort of as if BAPOC could lift the feeling of the entire room. I always felt. I felt like he could do that just by when his plane landed, and maybe by being on Earth too. It was similar kind of thing when he died. I was at work in Norway. I was living in Norway then, and I was working as a midwife in this hospital, and I just had an evening where I'd had a nice delivery. Everything was fine, and I was going out to my car, and my car wouldn't start. And this man came and he helped me. He jump started my car for me, and I asked him why he was there, and he said he'd just been with his son, his young son, and his son had just died. And I just felt this prayer inside of myself that I should pray for him, pray for his son, and pray for the heartbreak of losing a child, because it's very heartbreaking. And then after I got home, I found out that Bapak had passed away around that same time. So all that time that I was having this man's help and getting the car started and everything, I had another experience of Bapak. It wasn't directly with Bapak. I was living in Nigeria because my first husband is half Nigerian, so we went there and lived there. His father wanted us to live there. And I was watching the Franco Zeffirelli film about Jesus. I don't know if you've ever seen it, with Mary Magdalene was played by Anne Bancroft, and I think Olivia Hussey played Mary, and I forget the name of the actor who played Jesus, but I was watching it, and it was clear that he couldn't do it. He didn't have the content. One or two of the apostles actually were pretty good, but the man that played Jesus couldn't do it. And as I was watching it, I was sort of thinking to myself, oh, I wonder what it was like to live in the time of Jesus. You know, it must have been incredible. And I suddenly realized that I lived in the time of Bapak, and that I knew exactly what it was like, because I had those, it sort of sharpened it. And it was the first time that I realized that Bapak was a messenger of God and not just an ordinary man like he kept telling us he was. That, you know, that wasn't quite true.
Yeah.
It wasn't, I mean, it was true, but yeah. But he wasn't as ordinary as I am. So.
Or any of us.
No, right. Right, yeah. Yeah, so I have had some experiences, but not a direct, I didn't know Bapak. I wasn't one of the inner circle or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you say you were married to someone from Nigeria?
He is half Nigerian and half Swedish. And his father was a pediatrician. He was a very famous pediatrician in Nigeria. So I was a midwife already when we went there, and I worked as a midwife, and he's an architect. Or we're both retired now, but he's an architect. We didn't stay together. I left him. Yeah.
So was this before or after the what you described in the Congress?
Oh, you mean the first time that I met Bapak? Oh, this was much later. I didn't go to Nigeria until 1980.
Okay.
Mm. Yeah, in fact, I couldn't go to Anugraha, or maybe it was 81. It was 81. I went to Nigeria in 1981.
So you were married
yeah,
to
the experience.
You're
The
married.
experience at the Congress was in Toronto, and that was 79, wasn't it? The Toronto Congress.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, Yeah, so after that, I went and lived in the north of Norway.
Uh, and you did you say you were with Haris Wolfgang at the time of the
At
conference?
Skymont, no, that was at Skymont. That was the first time I saw Bapak. It was in Washington, DC somewhere,
Ah,
because we were living at Skymont. And he and I had sort of we'd been hanging out, and he said we should test about getting married. And we did that. And but they never told me what they got. And then finally, when I rustled up the courage to ask them, because the helpers used to do this thing at Skymont back then. I don't know if they did it later, but back then they used to do this thing where they would go into they had a room above a garage where they used to have their helper meeting, and they would do all the testing there. And if you were lucky, they would tell you what they got, but usually I wasn't lucky. Actually, the first time they tested for me to get opened, because I had had a very difficult time. That's why I left home early. Before I met my father, I'd had a very difficult time. And I think I really was I was still too fragile. But I was sitting out on the grass, minding my own business, not knowing that they were having their helper meeting, actually, I don't think even. And suddenly I felt like the earth opened up and I fell into hell. And I came to, and I was covered with mud grass, and I'd been crying, and I thought, whoa, what was that? And I went inside and I washed myself off. But I realized later, because I found out that, they had tested and received no. So that time they did tell me that they got no for me to be opened. And then they tested again in Los Angeles, and those helpers didn't tell me either. And I asked Rafaela, I said, what should I do? Because they're not telling me what they got, and they said they would test it on Friday, and here it is Monday, and I haven't heard yet. And she said, well, call them up, So yeah, but there was some, there were some that cared too much and some that didn't seem to care at all. But I think they were just disorganized. I don't think it was a matter of caring. I think, everybody probably thought somebody else was doing the telephoning.
yeah. So how did you get into nursing?
Well, at Skymont, I was working. I did several jobs. I worked in the kitchen and I cooked for everybody for a while. I worked in town as a waitress. I worked at the Melting Pot Pizza restaurant. And but occasionally, a lot of babies were born at Skymont, and occasionally I would be allowed to go in when when somebody was having their baby and watch, and be there, because a lot of the women who wanted to, any of the women who wanted to, could do that. So I used to, I guess I must have asked Anne Holiday an awful lot of questions. I was always asking her questions. I do remember that, because I remember her telling me at one point, Halima, I don't know anything about nutrition. Don't ask me that kind of question. And anyway, she said to me one day, she said, Halima, you could be a midwife. And I said, me? No, I don't even, I had at that point, I think I'd gotten my high school GED. So I did do that. I was, because I had to leave home. And so I dropped out rather than stay in a bad situation and finish school. So I did get my GED when I was at Skymont. I did went into town and I did the test in DC. So that was sort of like O levels, which is what you needed at the time in England. So I looked into studying midwifery in the United States, and there was the only accredited program was in New York City, but when you finished, you could only work in New York City. So I didn't really want to go to New York, and I couldn't afford it. I was, still trying to support myself in low-wage jobs. So Anne said, well, just go to England and, and they'll pay you to train. And I thought that was pretty astounding. I've also always been a bit allergic to getting debt, to getting in debt. I was always afraid to borrow money because felt like I could never pay it back. So I had a brother, my older brother. I have one brother who's a year older than me, and he was going to Oxford. So he was in England. We had lived there. We lived there in 1967, 68, and he'd stayed there and was now attending the university. And so I wrote to him and I said, can I come stay with you? I want to apply for nursing and midwifery school. And he said, sure, so I hopped on a plane and I arrived in England with my friend Halima, another Halima, who was still Helen, and she comes up to my shoulder. So Robert Batchelor used to say, you should go around telling people that you were twins till she got sick. Just because, we were good friends.
Was this?
It's Halima Harrison. I don't think you know her because she did the books. She lives in Front Royal anyway with her husband and her. I don't think any of her kids live there anymore, but yeah, and we're still friends. Anyway, we went together and we arrived in the Subud house in central London on Uxbridge Road in a state of some sleep deprivation and major confusion because we'd taken the bus to Uxbridge instead of Uxbridge Road, and then we had to take another bus back to London and then up to Uxbridge. We finally got there and we got in and they said, we have to test before you can stay here. But they rustled up some people and tested. Fortunately, we fell asleep on some chairs while they were doing that. So they wouldn't have gotten us out of there anyway. Yeah. But we did. We stayed there for a month or two. And it turned out that the day that we arrived, there were 5 gentlemen who were all fasting for a wife. And one of them was very sweet on Halima, my friend Halima, and they were, they were seeing each other for a while, but then she eventually actually went back to the US. Her mother didn't really want her to stay there, so. So anyway, that was then, and I went up to Oxford and stayed with my brother and came down to London. I went to the Royal College of Nurses in London. And I said, I want to be a nurse. How do I go about training? And they got me a cup of tea and some biscuits and they sat me down and they said, well, now where would you like to go? And here's a list of places. Because back then it was an apprenticeship system. And this was in 1973, 74. And it was an apprenticeship system. And so we worked a 40-hour week. And we lived in a kind of a special dormitory for nursing students, student nurses. And we were bused into the hospital every day or every night or whatever shift we had. And we wore those uniforms that you see with the cape and the red crisscross thingies and the long dresses and the starched aprons and the dress, it was sort of just below the knees and black tights, black shoes.
Yeah.
So and we did everything. We started out dusting and worked our way up.
Halima, just to check in, there's only about 5 more minutes left
Oh,
of
right.
the interview. So do you have any other things that you would like to say before we end this conversation?
Yeah. I think I would like to say that that the Latihan is an inestimable gift. And everything, I mean, on the face of it, my life might not look like it was a great success. I mean, there are many things that I'm sure I should have done better and could have done better. But it's always been a tremendous gift, the Latihan and also Ramadan, the experiences I've had of fasting. The first time I fasted, I wasn't opened yet. And there was a man at Skymount that irritated me incredibly. I used to get so angry with him. And I fasted that first time for the 30 days. And I came into the hall. We'd been cooking food, and I came into the hall for the Eid al-Fitr, for the asking forgiveness ceremony. And I saw him and a few other men that I had a problem with, and I just felt this tremendous love for them. And I realized that this was a miracle because I really hated this person. So yeah, that's the kind of thing. I've also felt that, in the Latihan, that kind of thing, that kind of love and that feeling for other people, just that they're such good people. It's kind of like seeing the essence of a person and not past whatever other thing bothers you or yeah. I always wondered what Bapak saw in us, if that's the way he saw us, or if he saw us as very flawed people, like little children who just didn't know how to behave. I think, but yeah, I'm very grateful to have the Latihan, extremely grateful. Of course, we don't know what our lives would be without it, but yeah, and for all the gifts I've been given because of it, like nursing and midwifery. It was a perfect job for me, and to earn my livelihood, and I did work at it for 38 years. So it was a great blessing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anything else?
Well, I can't really think of any more important than that to say. Yeah, no, I'm hoping still that I can maybe improve a little bit before I snuff it.
Me too.
I got a long way to go, so that's not likely that I'll, actually get to some exalted state, but but yeah, it's just a real joy and a real blessing.
Well, thank you, Halima.
Mm.
I'm happy that you were able to do this, and
Yeah.
hope you enjoyed yourself.
Oh yes, this was fine.
Okay. I'm going to
Yeah.
end the recording.
Mhm.
And the recording is stopped, but
Uh-huh. Yeah.
for some reason they have a 40-minute limit, but sometimes it goes on beyond that, and I haven't figured out how to
How
that
to finagle the system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's usually a 40-minute limit if there's several people on it, but
Mhm.
usually if it's a one-on-one situation, the time goes. But for some reason tonight, they just said 40 minutes. That's it.
Right, yeah. Well, I have a little taped interview that I did. I did it on my camera and I've got it on my old computer. I just have to figure out, that one is it's a tablet, really. It's not a real, I never liked it, but it was all I had for a few years. Anyway, it's of John Panopoulos. And I'd like to get that out and send it to you because he tells us kind of nice little story. It was before he was already getting a little bit drifty, in his way of talking and stuff. So Olivia is in the background prompting him. I was asking him some questions, and my father knew John Panopoulos before they were opened.
I think this, we have about another minute left. So how would you be able to put that recording onto YouTube?
No, I don't think I could do that. I used to have a YouTube account actually, but I never really used it. Well, I've never done anything like that. How do you do it? Do you just share it, or if you want to put it on Google, for example?
Well, YouTube is just a very easy way to upload, stuff like that onto the internet. If you just open up your old account or open up new account and go to the Subud Create or the YouTube Creators section,
okay,
you can download your video onto YouTube.
Okay.
Then you can share it in multiple ways,
Right. Yeah. Okay, I will try and do that because I have another interview too with this French guy. He's mostly speaking French, though. I don't speak French. I was asking him questions in English. He understood English, but he